Well, the mic's only for the people who aren't in.
No, you gotta do that.
I gotta. Okay.
You got it.
Just tilt it over.
I put it together. I know.
You're a little lanky.
You're not wrong. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Canadian Center for Men and Families. My name is Hayden. I'm the co-chair of the Toronto branch of CAFE, so I put on events like these ones. Tonight, we are having Karen. There's two reasons we're here. One, Karen, obviously, and two, because Ryerson students. The actual reason we're in this location is because we're unable to book a room at Ryerson. As many of you know, we have a men's issues awareness group on campus, unofficially. They have not been ratified by the student union, so there's that issue. If we were ratified by Ryerson, we'd be able to host events like this on campus. We'd have a suite of tools and equipment to be able to do that. So that's unfortunately why we're packed into this room. As many of you may or may not have heard, the Men's Issues Awareness Group recently lost their court case against the Ryerson Student Union. They are still fighting it. There's still a chance for them, and we may have a chance in the future with the new Ryerson Student Union because they just currently re-elected some new individuals. Karen, I'm going to introduce Karen. There's not much I can say that can really do justice to this person. So, Karen, would you please?
All right. So he's not even going to try. Thank you for not going on and on and on about how wonderful I am, because I know it. And
That's why there's an improvised script.
I always blush when people talk nice about me. So I much prefer when people have nasty things to say. Okay, so tonight's topic is the burden of being male. And so I want you all to imagine being a boy in middle school, maybe 13 years old. And one day you and all the other boys in school get pulled into the gymnasium for an assembly. And up at the front of the gym, there's a man from a charity called White Ribbon. And he's there to tell you how and why men abuse women. And the how is through physical, sexual, and psychological violence. And the why is because patriarchy. It's normative within our culture. It's just what men do. And in cultures like ours, patriarchies, men are elevated and women are subordinated. And society, this man says, doesn't really see anything wrong with men abusing their wives. Not at all. And he's here to tell you. He's here to tell you the incredibly rare message that it's never okay to hit a woman. Now, at the end of the presentation, he asks all the boys to stand up and put their left hand on their heart and their right hand up in the air and take a pledge to not only never, ever abuse a woman or a girl in their lives, but to intervene when they see another man doing that. They are supposed to, these boys are supposed to pledge to stand up and intervene when a woman or a girl is being abused by a man or a boy. Of course, by this time, you've turned 13, and you've already been bombarded with messages about how it's never okay to hit a girl or a woman. You've heard it from your parents, you've heard it from your teachers, you've seen it in TV shows and movies and in the commercials in between. You've seen it on billboards and on posters. You've seen it at the bus stop and at the mall. You may have even heard it from those girls who hit you and then said, "You can't hit me back, I'm a girl." Now, what would you think of this exercise in the gymnasium? Why are they telling you this again? Why would they think it's important enough to pull you out of class and tell you something you already know? Do they think you're dumb? Or is it that they think you're just so bad that despite the fact that you've heard this a million times, the message just isn't going to get through to you? That you still think that it's okay to hit a girl? Imagine thinking of all those posters and t-shirts and everything else celebrating girl power. Thinking about all the times you've heard girls being told they can do or be anything boys are and can and will. Thinking about Beyonce's hit song, Who Run the World, Girls. Thinking about that girl in your class who wears the boys are stupid, throw rocks at them, matching scarf, hat, and mitten set in the winter. How confusing would that be? What exactly are you expected to to be here? If boys and girls are equal, well, if they can do, girls can do anything boys can do, why can't they stand up for themselves? Why do they need you? And why do only boys need to be constantly reminded not to hit? So, what's so bad about boys that they need to be singled out like this? To be reminded how not to be bad? What's so special about girls that hitting them is somehow a worse crime than hitting a boy? Maybe if you were very precocious and analytical, you'd wonder why, in a world where girls run things, and where women can be and do anything a man can, uh, and why would women and girls even need your protection? And you might even wonder why no one seems interested in protecting you. We do this to boys in North America, in middle schools, and in Australia, and in the UK. A few years ago, I attended a Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event in Edmonton. I don't usually do stuff like that, like the on the street stuff. It's not my thing. But Men's Rights Edmonton's founder, Nick Redding, talked me into it. And we kept a pretty low key. We stood off to the side and just handed out literature on gender symmetry and domestic violence to people who approached us. The only thing that made us stand out was Nick Redding's famous or infamous Men's Rights Edmonton sandwich board, and which he actually assaulted me with on our walk down to Sir Winston Churchill Square. The wind took it and almost took my head off. So anyway, we noticed a bunch of young men in football uniforms and high heels standing there watching the speeches on the stage before the walk began. And one of our compatriots, who was not in a sandwich board, went and he was there incognito, went and talked to these boys, and they told him that they were essentially forced to be there. They had the option of not being there. There were uniforms from about 4 different high schools. They had the option not to be there if they were okay with being benched for 2 weeks.
What?
Yeah. So it was a forced participation thing. And while they were listening to the speeches, we handed them some literature and said, just give it a read later, give it a look later. And they quietly listened to the speeches, and then they dutifully walked their wobbly, teetering mile in high heels around Sir Winston Churchill Square, along with all the other men who were there to promote the radical and never before conceived notion that hitting women is wrong. So I'm just here to ask, what the hell are we doing to our boys and to our men? Aren't we demanding that they embrace 2 completely different paradigms, contradictory paradigms? In one, girls and women are their equals, every bit as tough, capable, resilient, self-reliant, and powerful as any boy or man. And in the other, girls and women are so vulnerable and fragile that they need to be treated with special gentleness and consideration, extra protection and respect. And they are so incapable that they need boys and men to rescue them from anything that might endanger or upset them. This is really what we're asking boys and men to do when we demand that they take collective responsibility, even as middle schoolers, for violence against women and girls. Collective responsibility, collective blame. And we're asking them to embrace that paradigm, that even though women are equal, men still need to do for them. You can see this reflected in campaigns against sexual violence as well. Current posters abound on consent and consent issues, particularly around alcohol. one that was particularly egregious, circulated at Coastal Carolina University in the US several years ago, read as follows, and I'm going to read it out. Jake was drunk. Josie was drunk. Jake and Josie hooked up. Josie could not consent. The next day, Jake was charged with rape. A woman who is intoxicated cannot give her legal consent for sex, so proceeding under these circumstances is a crime. It only takes a single day to ruin your life. Think about it. Be responsible. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? While many universities are taking a more gender-neutral approach these days, at least in terms of their promotional materials about sexual consent, in practice, it's still the same old thing. It's still on the man to take responsibility both for his own behavior and for the decision of the woman. Especially if a sexual encounter ends up in the weeds. The letter of the law on college campuses is that neither men nor women can consent if they are that intoxicated. But in practice, the spirit of the law is that men are doubly responsible, that the man is the one who is in charge of the entire endeavor, and the woman is, I guess, under his guardianship. We see feminist initiatives that call on men to stand up for women and girls whenever they see any kind of violence or sexism against them. He for she, I'm sure some of you have heard of it, a much publicized UN women campaign spearheaded by celebrity Emma Watson, initially asked women to pledge a vow to stand up whenever they saw violence or sexism against a woman or a girl. After a few months of pushback on social media, they changed the message to be more gender neutral, but it's still targeting men, and that name still gives the same message. He for she. He for she. Not all for all. He for she. So what kind of messages are men and boys, particularly young men and boys, taking away from this culture? You don't matter. Girls and women do. It's your job to provide and protect for them. Be what girls and women need you to be. That's your role. Know your role. How is this any different from the messages of the past? Well, the messages of the past weren't so confusing. No one's allowed to actually say anymore that girls and women actually need you, that they're dependent on you. That's not allowed. Women and girls are independent, tough, strong, capable, competent. They can do anything you can do. Not allowed to say that you're needed. In fact, we're allowed to say that you're obsolete. And you're not allowed to get any gratitude for it at all, for the special role that you fulfill. Feminists will often tell their male allies who've put in a lot of work and effort amplifying women's voices that you don't deserve a cookie just for being a decent human being. There's blog posts essentially saying that, and that's a phrase that they use. You don't deserve a cookie just for doing the bare minimum that a decent human being would do, which is pledge their entire existence to women's causes. I don't think that that's really the bare minimum of what a decent human being does. Even worse, the pressure on young men these days to be successful and self-sufficient is just the same as it always was. But these men are actually then made to feel guilty about their success. If you succeed, you did it because you were able to do that because of privilege, male privilege. In a recent interview on BBC Radio in the UK, Jordan Peterson said that we fail to differentiate between men's competence and their tyranny. And I really, that really encapsulates our attitudes about men these days. We still haven't figured out a way for a man to win in a competition with a woman. If he wins, he didn't earn it. He got it handed to him because male privilege. And if he loses, he lost despite playing life on the easy setting. He lost. He must be a real loser if he lost to a woman in a patriarchal culture where he's privileged. So when he wins, the victory was handed to him by patriarchy and all the unearned privilege it confers on him, and he didn't earn it. In fact, he stole it from someone who would have earned it if he hadn't been there exploiting his privilege to get it. And if he loses, he lost to a woman who essentially is portrayed as having one hand tied behind her back. A woman crushed by sexism and cultural norms in a society that runs on female subordination, yada, 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 yada. If he steps into the support role for a woman, like those male feminists do, he'd better not expect that cookie just for being a decent human being. If he excels in the support role, he may even be accused of trying to take over or to mansplain or to impose his masculine will on the women around him and silence women's voices. One of the most surprising things is how little has actually changed. What has changed is not the expectations. The expectation is men will do what women want them to do or need them to do. That's really what the expectation is on men. It's the surrounding context of those expectations that makes things so difficult for men these days. They're obligated to help and protect women, but can never insinuate by word or deed that those women might actually depend on their help and protection. What that necessarily means is they can't expect anything in return. Men are obligated to step back and make space for women to lead, but can never insinuate that these women were handed their space, and given that chance out of, I don't know, generosity or out of a sense of fair play, or that men were forced to give something up that they could have had in order for women to have those things. A friend of mine put things this way. First wave feminism sought to give women men's rights without men's responsibilities. Second wave feminism sought to reduce or eliminate women's responsibilities. And third wave feminism seeks to increase men's responsibilities. And that's really the way I see it. When all the mixed messages are tallied up, we find that men can't win for losing. They still bear the majority of the burdens they did 100 years ago. To one degree or another, they are still expected to pay on the first date and onward, even months or years into the relationship. Still expected to be the higher earner in the relationship. Still expected to pay most or all of the household bills. Still expected to be at least as educated as their female partner, if not more. Still expected to be the one to buy the ring and to buy the flowers and then to buy the chocolates on Valentine's Day. Still expected to put themselves between a woman and any danger. Still expected to take responsibility for themselves and others, especially women and children. The primary difference is they aren't allowed to expect any thanks, gratitude, respect, status, or reward for it. In fact, these expectations in the current zeitgeist aren't a continuation of the traditional masculine roles of yesteryear. They only exist so men can atone for their collective historical wrongdoings. That's why. That's how they've changed the narrative. Right? We expect the same things of men, but only because men owe it to us for how horrible men were in the past. Men should still pay on the first date because women earn less than men. And that's part of patriarchy. So it's the least men could do. They should still be the higher earner and pay most of the bills because of the wage gap and because women are still unfairly expected, even if they want to, even if it's their choice, to take on the majority of the household duties and childcare. So it's the least men could do. Men should still put themselves between a woman and danger because the patriarchy men constructed and maintain is uniquely dangerous to women. So it's the least men could do. I'm blown away by the kind of double bind we're putting our men and boys in right now. It doesn't matter what they do. There's some way you can shame them for it. Jodi Allard, who has written articles published by the Washington Post, among others, she had a habit of using her two sons as examples in her articles of what is wrong with men and boys. and as foils for her general animus towards men. And she says in a blog post, "One of my sons was hurt by my words, although he's never told me so. He doesn't understand why I lumped him and his brother together in my essay. He sees himself as the good one, the one who is sensitive and thoughtful and who listens instead of reacts. He doesn't understand that even quiet misogyny is misogyny, and that not all sexists sound like Twitter trolls. He is angry at me now, although he won't admit that either, and his anger led him to conservative websites and YouTube channels, places where he can surround himself with righteous indignation against feminists and tell himself it's ungrateful women like me who are the problem." What drove her son to seek out more male-friendly voices on the internet? When writing about rape culture in the Washington Post, she claimed that her sons, despite being good boys, were not safe boys. They contribute to structural misogyny and rape culture. The article went viral, and her boys found themselves at the center of a public internet shitstorm over their own mother casting them as, while good boys, still potential, perhaps inevitable victimizers of women. She continues, and this is where it gets good. "As a single mother, I sometimes wonder whether the real problem is that my sons have no role models for the type of men I hope they become. But when I look around at the men I know, I'm not sure a male partner would fill that hole. Where are these men?" Fill that hole. Yeah, I heard someone snigger. "Where are these men who are enlightened but not arrogant, who are feminists without self-congratulation? If my sons need role models, they may have to become their own. If the feminist men, the men who proudly declare their progressive politics and their fight for equality, aren't safe, then what man is? No man, I fear." So there's just no pleasing this bitch. This woman has a platform in nationally distributed publications, and she has written elsewhere that one of her sons is suicidal. I wonder why. Can't imagine why. She goes on to say, "It pains me to say that I don't feel emotionally safe with men and perhaps never have with a man. But it needs to be said because far too often we are afraid to say it. This is not a reflection of something broken or damaged in me. It is a reflection of the systems we build and our boys absorb. Those little boys grow into men who know the value of women, the value that's been ascribed to us by a broken system, and it seeps out from them in a million tiny, toxic ways." Where is Child Protective Services? Toxic ways like what? Seeking out conservative websites that, while placing all the same expectations of selflessness on men, at least congratulate them for being selfless. Being angry at mom for turning them into a national spectacle. Feeling betrayed by a mother who can never be convinced that they've been sufficiently defanged and declawed and rendered safe. This sick paradigm is actually finding its way into middle and even elementary schools. And here's the thing. Young men aren't afraid of responsibility. In fact, they tend to crave it. Jordan Peterson has said more than once that he was taken by surprise by how appealing his message was to young men. He said, "What's my message? Clean your room, grow up, take responsibility, fix yourself, then pick up a burden and carry it forward. Make your life better, make your family's life better, make your community better." Guys are eating it up. There's nothing in there about rights. There's nothing in there about life being easy. He's saying life is hard. Embrace it, grab it, and go. Well, what's it about his message that resonates with young men when Jody Allard's obviously does not? You only have to listen to the two of them to really understand. Peterson's message is one of compassion, care, and understanding. Allard's is one of shame and demand. That's all it is. Shame and demand. Peterson is like the benevolent father who wants what is best for his children, for young men, because what is best for young men is best for them and best for everyone. Allard is mommy dearest, an emotional black hole who will never, it just sucks your soul right in, and you just have to keep throwing things, parts of yourself in there, and no matter how many times you throw pieces in, it just keeps wanting more. She will never be satisfied no matter what her boys do. And where are men today? They're at a crossroads. They can attempt to appease the Jody Allards of the world and inevitably fail because they've been set up to fail. There is no way for them to succeed. Or they can take a different path and define masculinity for themselves. And they can accept the empty promises of equality offered by movement feminism, or the mutant offspring of feminism and traditionalism that passes for modern conservatism. Or they can focus on themselves and their own betterment and go from there where they will. And that's what I hope young men will do. Men still have so much to offer all of us. It's time we began acknowledging that again and inviting them back into the discussion. And men have been strong voices for women's equality since long before John Stuart Mill. Isn't it time they became strong voices for their own equality? Isn't it time? Thank you.
Okay, so Karen's going to take some questions. If anybody has questions, we have a microphone that'll be handed around.
Okay, we're gonna get tangled up in the cord, I think. Did someone bring a twister mat? Really? Oh, go get it. Oh, you can't get the door open. Yeah.
Anybody? Can we hand the mic over to that lady over there?
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Thank you for coming today.
Yep.
So I'm a student at Ryerson, and I think a lot of us students, especially, are concerned with how to talk about these issues on campus, because often people bring up the fact that women have been historically abused or victimized. So how can we, as students, bring up these issues without seeming like that we're victimizing anyone?
Well, I think, like if it was me and I had 17 hours to explain it to them, I could probably make a fairly decent case that women were never particularly oppressed. Life was shitty for pretty much everybody, other than the top 1%. And the top 1% of women didn't really have it very bad. But I think you have to actually maybe take that as a given and say, essentially give them some less cliched version of two wrongs don't make a right. That really, is this what women are? That once they have gotten to the point where they are full citizens within the public sphere, that what they want to do is take their revenge on about things that happened before they were even born. Is that where we're at? Is that what women are like? Because if that's what women are like, I don't know if they belong in the public sphere. So don't tell them that, because that'll probably be really annoying to them. But so I think that that's really the point you have to actually take it from. And from there, it's very, very difficult convincing someone who's already been pulled into the ideology. So what you could do is try to have these conversations. Someone leaned on the light switch, I'm guessing. Have these conversations in a place where there are other people listening, so that and just try not to get mad. Try to remain reasonable and calm. Often what happens is you make a good point, they start yelling, they storm off, they rage quit, and they don't end up making their side look very good. And so if there are other people watching, those people might kind of think, okay, maybe there's something to this men's issues stuff or this anti-feminism stuff. So I think that's really the approach that you have to take. I'm so sorry that you're on Ryerson's campus. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
You could transfer to the. Oh wait, the University of Alberta is pretty infested too. So
Yeah, it's difficult because a lot of my grades depend on it, and sometimes I do speak out about these issues.
hmm
But people are often really surprised because they categorize me as an Asian woman. So they're like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be a victim. Why are you?
oh yeah, you're like you're oppressed on so many axes of oppression. You're like the intersectional dream. It's like you're Asian. You're a woman. I don't know. Is there anything else about you? Do you have like uh dyslexia or something, or maybe you're hard of hearing? Um, but yeah, it's they won't expect it from a woman. They especially don't expect it from a woman with short hair and comfortable shoes like me. So, but all right,
Thank
is
you.
that okay? That's
Um, Hi. I don't have a question for you, but I wanted to tell you something. Um, Around the topic of Asians, my wife is South Korean,
Mhm.
and in South Korea they have you mentioned Valentine's Day, right? How men are supposed to always provide on Valentine's Day. Well, there's a model in South Korea. They actually have 2 days.
Mhm.
They have Valentine's Day and a White Day. So the White Day is for women. I think Valentine's Day is for men there, and White Day is for women. And so you have two separate days there
so the woman actually buys gifts, and
for the man
so
on
it's kind of like
Valentine's.
steak and a blowjob day.
Yeah. Well, that's
Excellent.
what I call it.
That's a real day. Look it up.
So you talked about like Asia, right? But they, I think that's a great model
I
to
think
bring
I
here
think it absolutely is too. I mean, South Korea has its issues. They have mandatory military service
for
for
men.
men, and one of the things that really struck me because um, years like up until a couple of years ago, the 2 years or so of service, I think it's 2 years, that men had to do while their sisters or their same age female peers were already in university. What those men could do is they could use they could use those years as university credit or as job experience. And the feminists in South Korea said that that was unfair, gave men an unfair advantage, and so they stopped allowing men to use their service, their military service, to get some credits for university. So, which I think is that like how is it unfair to women to allow them to use them that way? So I mean, it's they have their issues, but that whole White Day, you should tell them to rename it Steak and a Blowjob Day. I think the men there would really, really like that change.
They're pretty conservative, so they wouldn't go for that. And just one more comment before I go. Like the provincial elections coming up,
Mhm.
and traditionally I've been an NDP supporter, and I've worked on campaigns in the past for the NDP. But and I was thinking this time around of working with working on another campaign.
Mhm.
But the thing I've noticed over the years is that feminism has really taken hold in the NDP.
Yes.
It's become an ideology there, and
It's
I
no longer about working class people.
yeah, it's about feminism, and I've decided that I'm not going to work for the NDP candidate this time around because this feminist ideology that's taken hold in the NDP.
hmm
So I just want to
Have
throw
you
this
figured
comment.
out what party you might think of going to?
Well, yeah, I don't
The
know from
only, I
there.
mean, we had an alternative in Alberta called Wild Rose, but a lot of people who are progressives would really not like them because they're very libertarian and quite socially conservative, but in on the individual level, socially conservative, most of them, but not in the sense that they want to legislate morality or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know what kind. Maybe you could start your own political party. You can call it
Yeah,
the Patriarchy Party. I have
yeah,
a pamphlet here somewhere.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I don't know where to go from here. So
well, one of my Nick Redding of Men's Rights Edmonton actually ran for city councillor in Ward 8 in Edmonton a few years ago under the Patriarchy Party ticket, and he said, because you want to oppress women, vote patriarchy. And some of his there was a picture of him with a Tonka truck, a big Tonka truck, like this, and on the pamphlet, and the caption said, uh, "Nick seizes a truck from the hands of a little girl. Later, he will feast on her tears." And oh yeah, and he's one of his campaign promises was by the time he was done gutting the domestic violence budget for the province, there would be one bed in the province for men, male victims, and a dirty dog blanket for women. And he got 484 votes. He came in dead last, but my parents voted for him because they saw his pamphlet and they thought it was hilarious. So, but uh-oh, we're gonna have problems with the wire.
It's actually not a question. It's just a comment.
Okay.
I was looking up on Google, and did you know that Jody Aller's son applied for a job with Ben Shapiro?
Ben Shapiro, yeah.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Oh, I know.
I mean, that's like brilliant. Good for him.
Well, Ben Shapiro heard about it and he offered him a
Really?
job. Yeah.
Oh, good
He
for
went on
him.
the radio and he said, I would like to offer this young man a job.
Good for him.
And I don't know if he actually ended up taking it. His mother probably beat him with a wire coat hanger or something like that. In, when he,
Where were their fathers?
I have no idea. I think it might only be one dad. I'm not sure, but she's divorced and
Gee, shocker.
yeah, I know.
It's like, really?
I find it really strange. There are actually some men out there who will um, tolerate being with a woman who treats them like that, and I wouldn't expect a woman to tolerate a man who said nothing but horrible things about women all the time, and but you by extension, honey, you are a horrible, horrible person because yeah, I wouldn't put up with that, and I don't think anybody should. So, anybody else?
That sounds like self-rejection. Everything that she's doing, everything that she's internalizing,
Oh yeah, and
projected through her kids.
she's saying, it's not her that's broken. It's not a reflection on anything that's broken inside of her. And I'm thinking, oh, lady, you need to be on some lithium or something, or I don't know, Valium, Ativan, something, cocktail of drugs. Um, because she just seems to she seems to have this view of the world, and so many, and this is what's so horrible about women's studies classes. I mean, I'm assuming that some are better than others depending on who's teaching them, or some are less bad than others. But when you get a really radical professor in a women's studies course and they're getting you to read uh, bell hooks and Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon and all of these sort of icons of the second wave, and then you're reading uh, The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, and you're reading and every single every single aspect of society is in their minds a cultural text. It's a text that is open to interpretation. So that clock over there, I could I could analyze that through a critical theory lens to figure out how exactly it's oppressing me right now. And so everything, the calendars, holidays, clothing, everything except for a woman's choice of clothing, I guess, is open to interpretation. So, and the interpretation that they're supposed to draw is that in every single situation, in every single aspect of life, women are being oppressed by that. So, air conditioning, oppressive. Well,
No, that's a real one.
it's really warm in here.
Someone made that argument.
For women, but not men.
Oh, microphone?
I'm just curious. If you had Justin Trudeau's ear for 10 minutes, what would you say to him in order to advance this
If I had
idea?
Justin Trudeau's ear for 10 minutes, for 10 minutes.
Okay, 15.
Okay, if I had access to him for 10 minutes and I actually wanted to convince him, I would probably have to abduct him, hold him in a cellar tied to a chair, right? Pour cold water on him over and over and over again, deprive him of protein, and put him through a full deprogramming Um, so I don't know that I would be able to. Uh, well, it would only take 10 or 15 minutes to grab him and throw him in a van, and after that, I have all the time in the world. Okay, nobody on this live stream spread rumors about how I'm planning to kidnap the prime minister, because I'm not. Y'all know I'm way too lazy for that. So, but yeah, I don't know what I would say. I don't know what I would say. There's just not enough time uh, to talk about something so big.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
um,
Hi. So a couple of months ago, I saw the Red Pill, the
mhm.
movie, and one of the things I didn't like was it was presented as feminism has been shouting for way too long, way too loudly,
Mhm.
versus MRA that hasn't been shouting. So now we have to shout even louder than feminism. Um, is there is there a way? Is there a better way than that? Because I feel that if that's the game plan,
Mhm.
MRA is going to lose. Is there no way to say, look, this is not about who shouts. The truth is not who shouts the loudest. The truth is not about, what the general consensus is. Can we somehow actually talk using facts and get to the bottom of this without just shouting over each other?
Well, okay, that's actually been tried, and the reason you haven't heard about it is because nobody's really heard about it. Um, there are a whole bunch of people that I'm friendly with. I'm actually in a weekly, well, I usually skip it, but in a weekly conference call for the coalition to create a White House Council on Boys and Men. And the people involved there are all in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, and they're veterans. They've been in this for a long time. People like Fred Hayward, who was in the film, Warren Farrell, who was in the film. You saw Warren Farrell in the film. He's like so cuddly. He's so cuddly, and I couldn't even imagine him shouting. I couldn't even imagine him glaring at his child. So, like to warn him away from, going at the socket with a butter knife or something like that. He wouldn't even yell then. So that has been tried for about since the mid 1980s. And we're only getting traction now. And one of the things that has got us traction, because when you're quiet, people can ignore you, right? And what has to happen, I think, and one of the things too, because we have a lot of people who come into certain forums and complain that we really need to get rid of Paul Elam, distance ourselves from Paul Elam, of A Voice for Men. He's loud, he's rude, he's shouty, he says provocative things that get people angry, and he's maybe even really a misogynist, which he's not. He's actually really sweet. But I always tell them you need to be thanking him because his what he has done is he has gotten the attention of the media. He's gotten the media at least reporting on the issues and putting them out there, even if it's in a poor light or he's portrayed in a poor light. And you even see some of the feminists who essentially say MRAs just want to fight for men's right to rape women and things like that. They'll say, and they're hiding behind genuine men's issues to do it, right? So they're actually now starting to acknowledge that men have genuine issues. And what people like Paul do is they push the boundaries of the permissible discourse outward, right? So Justin, definitely not shouty. Paul Elam and the people who say provocative things and maybe who shout, they are pushing the edge of the discourse outward, making room for people like Justin to actually do their work. And if you want to constantly talk about, uh, we need to be more conciliatory, we need to be more polite, we need to use nicer language, we need to be more gentle in our approach, right? That's just painting ourselves into a corner. Because what's going to happen is if we get rid of Paul Elam, who's going to be the radical on the edge of the men's rights movement then? That'll be me, right? And when we get rid of me, because I'm the radical who's embarrassing everybody. Well, who's it going to be then? It'll be Cassie J. And when we get rid of Cassie J, who's the next one? Well, then maybe it'll be Justin, right? So these issues are really, really, really difficult because it's not like feminism. Feminism had all of these age-old expectations and stereotypes. I mean, they came along in the 60s and told us it was this novel idea that it's not okay to hit your wife, right? Well, they used to whip men at the whipping post for beating their wives. Oh, they came along in the 60s and said rape is bad. Did you know that? Right? Oh, and everyone went, had no idea. Rape was the last non-lethal capital crime to be, that could get you the death penalty in the United States and in most countries that no longer have the death penalty, right? So you can't tell me that people didn't realize rape was bad. It was a capital crime. So they had all of these inner prejudices that they could exploit, all of these ways that we have of thinking about men and women that they could exploit in order to get their work done. And we don't, because all of the prejudices that apply to you guys are, well, dust yourself off, rub a little dirt in it, walk it off, get back to work. Don't complain. And if there's no blood, it doesn't hurt. So, and if there is blood, well, it's not enough to whine, not enough blood to whine about it. So that's a major, major handicap. And we're going to have a lot more trouble getting our issues addressed than the feminist movement did. And that's going to mean that we're going to need a multitude of approaches. Some of us are going to have to yell and keep the heat on. And, I've often said, why did America embrace Martin Luther King? I mean, they weren't really loving the guy at first, right? But then Malcolm X showed up and showed them what the alternative was. And they were like, okay, we'll go with the preacher over here. So I think it's going to have to be a multifaceted approach, and people are just going to have to do what they're good at. And we are going to need some sane, calm, rational voices who can speak on panels or who can finagle themselves onto advisory boards. Harry Crouch, you would have seen him in The Red Pill. He was the one who talked about paternity fraud, the one who, in the glasses with the nasal voice, and runs a National Coalition for Men. He actually sits on the ad hoc advisory committee for domestic violence in San Diego. He managed to, after several years of pushing, finagle himself onto that advisory council. So, those are, and there's lots of things that NCFM does, and I'm sure that Cafe does sort of behind the scenes, a lot of legwork and a lot of making phone calls, a lot of writing letters that we don't see, right? But those aren't going to be effective unless we have somebody keeping the issues in the news, in the media. So anybody else?
Thank you.
One more.
Speaking of loud voices, I was wondering, what do you think of Milo and his work? Do you think he's harming, or do you think he's providing positive contribution to some of the men's issues?
Well, I think he gets a lot of men's issues a little bit wrong. I think he has an overly rosy view of feminism, particularly second wave and first wave feminism. But that's fine. And personally, I really like Milo. I almost went on a pony ride with him. So I invited him, and then we got to talking and drinking, and it never happened. But I think he actually helps more than harms, just because he does keep everything out there, and because he is so fearless. He is an agent of chaos. He's a Loki, and he's Jordan Peterson called him a trickster, right? And I think that is something that can stir things up, and stirring things up is really not such a bad thing. It can be scary, but I really don't think he does he does some harm, of course, but he doesn't do a huge amount. I think we get more from him than we lose. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious, just sort of a follow on that kind of thing. I'm just curious, what from your perspective, Like what? Well, I think my voice should carry well enough. But what let's say reporters and bloggers and whatever out there that you feel from your own perspective offer, even if they don't necessarily have to be men's rights activists, but offer at least a more balanced approach, that they're honest about the sides, trying to to trying to present something in a fair way.
You know what's really hilarious is most of them are women.
Ignore it. Don't worry about it.
All right, I'm ignoring it. Most of them are women. So you got Barbara Kay, you got Christy Blatchford, and Christy Blatchford's coverage of the Gian Gomeshi trial was absolutely excellent. And although it could have gone more in depth, um, if you want to actually know more about what went on, because what was presented in most of the media was absolutely ridiculous and had nothing to do with what was actually seen in that trial. Go to a channel called Feminism Kek, K-E-K, and or maybe it's still called Feminism Lol, or just Google, search the name Diana Davison on YouTube and search her Gomeshi files, because she goes through all the transcripts and everything. So she does a really good job. And go donate to her Lighthouse Project, because she actually helps men who've been falsely or wrongfully accused, helps advise them and consult with them and their lawyers, and help them build a good defense. So, okay, so Christy Blatchford, Barbara Kay, Kathy Young in the U.S., Margaret Wente is not bad. Oh, who else? Who else? Kathy Young, Wendy McElroy in the U.S. She's excellent. So there's a whole bunch. Oh, Ash Scow in the U.S. God, rattling off names. There are actually a whole bunch of fairly sympathetic journalists out there who will write about specific cases and point out the unfairness. Most of them are women, I think, probably because men don't really get away with it. George Will wrote an article. I mean, he's a nationally syndicated columnist. He's been doing this his entire career. And he wrote an article that basically posed the question: if two young people equally voluntarily drink, equally voluntarily get drunk, and equally voluntarily decide to have sex, the only reason to call the man the rapist and the woman his victim is sexism. And feminist websites had a petition up to have him fired, have all his entire syndication taken away. St. Louis Dispatch dropped his column. And so, I mean, like he got bombarded. James Taranto got bombarded for, oh God, I think it was a wage gap column that he wrote, and he just took so much heat from that. And Bill Frezza, who isn't actually a journalist, but he does do some articles as freelance on some major publication. I think it was Forbes. He actually wrote an article giving advice to frat boys as the head of his regional Greek society. So he was the regional chair of this particular fraternity, and he was giving advice to young men in fraternities to not allow women who had been pre-gaming into their parties. And pre-gaming, for all you old fogies, is drinking at home before you go out, because it's cheaper, right? So you guzzle a Mickey of vodka, and then you head out and stagger to the party, and you're already halfway there. And he said, don't let them in. And the reason he got in trouble, and that article was deleted and he was fired, the reason he got in trouble was because his concern was for the frat boys and their liability, not for he was equally concerned for girls who could be victimized. But he said, here's a reason out of self-interest to not let these girls in, right? You will be liable for anything that happens to them when they're in that state, when they're in your house. And you don't want to get in that kind of trouble. And because he showed any concern whatsoever for the position these boys would be in, right? That was it. He was gone. So, all right. Anybody else? Is this the last one? Okay.
There could be more.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, cheers. Thank you. Sorry, I saw you live last night via YouTube. I was going to make it. I bought the ticket, but I didn't make it. But with the fatherlessness, as well as with as a Christian myself,
Mhm.
I know, like, with the edging out kind of the fathers as well. I noticed with feminists as well, but also with liberal males, as them trying to edge God out, but also with this edging out of the
They want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, essentially. Like they want to
yeah,
throw all of the traditions of
exactly.
that are in that are, I guess, carried forward through religious
Anything associated with patriarchy,
with religion.
any religious beliefs, especially with patriarchy, or any higher power associated with male gender.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's associated with any of those feminist movements, if it's connected with them wanting to, like, they've been trying to throw out the earthly father, but they're also trying to throw out the godly father as well by making him a woman. I don't know if that's a thing as well. It's been kind of disturbing myself lately, but
Well,
I don't know.
it should like they want to usher in some of them the kind of woo woo spiritual feminists, who I was on a blog, or I shouldn't have gone there because I'll never be able to unsee that. But there was a blog. It's called Raising the Skirt, and it's all about this 3-day retreat where women get to know their vaginas and show actually their
Oh, I might
vulvas,
have
and
seen
there's a
that.
big
Yes.
paragraph about how people use improper language. um you know but these kind of woo woo feminists, right? They want to bring back Wicca. They want to bring back sort of the earth mother goddess type thing, and they don't have any clue, right? Like in 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 the Northlands, right, in the Nordic countries, when women were in charge of when it was all goddess stuff, right? They were like sacrificing babies and kittens right and left, right? So I mean, at least when they started worshiping Odin, they were usually sacrificing grown men. Not babies and kittens. But like you have to realize that they don't like anything where a man has any kind of status. Like some of these feminists, they just, God is a man. No, he's not. He can't be, because that would be unfair. And they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They're going to throw all of the entire religious tradition out. They're not going to accept that there are maybe some pieces of wisdom within holy texts that, in terms of how we arrange our societies and our lives, like monogamous marriage, or at least marriage as a concept, even polygynous marriage, the holding responsible of men. Look at the word matrimony. Matrimony, you think it means marriage. No,
Ah,
it means the state of motherhood. That's
yes.
where that word comes from.
Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, that's the whole purpose of marriage, is to chain that father to mother and child, right? And that's one of the main things that has actually helped build civilizations, is the chaining of fathers to mothers and children. So
In the end, yeah,
I'm
it's just
cringe to
mother and
think of
child.
where we're going, now that we're just like throwing the men overboard, and leaving the women and children to their own devices. So it's really sad to me, but I think that they just resent anything that they, like I said in my speech last night, they want the conditions of the family to lie, all the power to determine that to lie in the hands of women. So whether there will be a man, whether there won't, whether they have kids, whether they don't, um, whether they abort their children, or have them, uh, it's all to be decided by the woman. Whether they start off with a man and then kick him out and keep the kids, right? It's all in her hands. That's what they want. So.
Yeah, that's true. And, like, even though women tend to blame the men to be abusive, and even though sometimes they are,
Mhm.
like in my case, with my father, he was often abusive, but my mom was lenient to let me spend time with him, and that was very important for me.
Yeah.
But you know, like you know, women need to allow the father's influence, because that's very important, as you said in last night's, you know, and so that's very good, you know. So it was a very good talk last night, and once
Awesome.
again, so I thank you for that.
Awesome.
Thank
Do
you
we
for
have time for that one last one? Okay.
Oh, all right.
Thank-
All right. I'm gonna
All right.
bolt. I'm gonna bolt for the door. Everybody better get out of the way, 'cause I need a
Well-
cigarette. But
well, thank you so much for entertaining. the
all
questions.
right. You're welcome.
Love you, darling.
All right. Oh, freaking hot in here.
Hayden, can you close the event? Can you and they tech you to sign up?
So we do have a sign-up list for anybody who'd like to be notified of future events. If anybody's interested, come see me after. And we have pizza, so please come enjoy. Thank you.
Okay, we are done with the stream. So thanks guys for joining us on this live stream. We'll see you next time.